Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David E.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Well, good afternoon and good morning, I should say, for those of you tuning in here on Spotlight Hawaii. I'm Ryan Kalei Suji, joined by Yunji Denise. I am actually on the road here, live in Los Angeles. Of course, Yunji is back in Honolulu, and this morning we have a familiar face joining our program.
That's right. We're talking to him both in the role that he has now and about the role that he'd like to have. We're talking, of course, about Lieutenant Governor Josh Green, who is also a candidate for governor. He joins us this morning live from his campaign headquarters. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me again.
I want to dive straight into COVID. We are in a very different place than we have been when we've talked in over the months and years past. Tell us about, from your view, where we stand. And I do want to ask, just in the context when I was looking at the Department of Health numbers, our positivity rate is increasing, but it appears that hospitalizations are very low.
Yes, we're in a great spot, Yunji, and thank you, Ryan, also for being here. We're in a place where we have moved past the acute crisis. We are now in a very stable space for our people. We have 20 people in the hospital. We peaked, if you recall, during the Omicron surge at 393 people in the hospital. So with 20 people in the hospital statewide, 3 individuals in the ICU, we're down 95% from our peak. That has meant that we can safely go to a place where we begin to get rid of all the restrictions. As you know, we dropped the mask mandate with the exception of schools. We dropped safe travels because it worked so well, and we're not really struggling with a large caseload now. We have 1,587 active cases in the state. That peaked at 58,521. That means we're down 97+% from our peak of active cases. So the viral load is much lower in our state, and people are safer. That doesn't mean we should completely let our guard down, but that's what I'm here for, to check every morning across the globe to see if our numbers are up. The Director of Health is doing that also. Just making sure we don't see a variant surge somewhere, like the BA2 variant, or anything that would threaten our people. So people can keep making good decisions. I still recommend people getting boosters. A lot more people can get boosters than have. Most of our people who chose to get vaccinated were able to stay very healthy. So these are the things that we at least can be proud of. And I'm so grateful to the people of Hawaii for making sacrifices to get us through this. We ended up having the lowest rate of COVID in the country and the second lowest mortality rate in the country to Vermont by a small margin. So we really did great, but we want to be smart going forward.
You mentioned the BA2 variant. I'm wondering if you can update us on what we're seeing in the community in Hawaii. So far, we know that it is present in our islands. Is there any concern on that front with what we're seeing globally and also what we're seeing overall locally?
Modest concern. The Omicron variant was the large variant that spread everywhere, as you know. That's when we went to 58,000. The BA2 variant is a subvariant. It's got 40 mutations different from the Omicron variant, so it's sticky. It's a little more infectious, but it's not sending more people to the hospital, and that's why we're able to come off of our restrictions. It's about 40% of all the cases here. It probably will become the dominant variant in very short order, but our vaccines are still keeping people from becoming severely ill. And most of our population has immunity now. Like I said earlier, 77% had 2 shots. Of those, 55% of the people got a booster. And now, important to mention, put my doctor hat on for a second, if you're over 50 years old, you now can go get a booster shot also, a second booster. And that will provide some more immunity. Going forward, I think it will be a once-a-year injection that will be recommended. We'll wait for the CDC to give us guidance, and I really do like to follow the science because that's analytical and not political. So we'll go that way. But yes, BA2 is a variant of consequence, but it's not making our people so sick that we're seeing high mortality rates.
You know, you mentioned right off the top that we did lose the mask mandate. Scott has a question here. He says, when will schools permit optional indoor masking like the students have at Iolani and in the rest of the United States? I'm presuming that he's mentioning Iolani because you've shared in the past that your daughter is a student there, and that school, of course, has dropped the indoor mask mandate for students. And we expect that other private schools will soon follow. But when do you think the DOE will take that up? And is that something that you'd support?
I really appreciate Scott bringing that up. My daughter does go to Iolani. My son goes to a charter school here on Oahu, so public and private. And so Iolani's done a great job keeping infection from spreading. I did speak to the superintendent 2 or 3 days ago and expressed my concern about the impact on children and continuing to be masked. I want to come back to that in a second. In my opinion, we can do it safely and come down off of masks. However, there is some concern that if one group of students are wearing masks and the other isn't, and then people are exposed and have to go into 5-day quarantine, it can create some tension between students. And we don't need tension, don't need bullying, we have to be careful. Now let me speak about the impact on adolescents. Today, my colleagues at the American Medical Association produced a report that does concern me. 2 out of every 5 adolescents have expressed signs of depression in our country right now. And 1 out of 5, 20%, have considered harming themselves or committing suicide because of their isolation, because of difficulties navigating this pandemic. That's why I'm preaching that we should go toward normal now, and why I expressed to the superintendent it's very important that you also consider those possibilities, that people are having a hard time with mask wearing and with isolation. We are in a place with such a low viral load that we can do it safely. I do have to defer to the Department of Health and their conversations with the Department of Education. What I did tell the superintendent is under no circumstances, if we continue to do this well, should we have any kind of mask mandates as they begin the next school year or summer school. I think it would be definitely time to move away from that. These are large institutions and they have to run their shop the way they choose to, but it was safe to bring down the mask mandate for us at large because our viral loads are so low.
With another, as we continue to talk about some of these restrictions that have been lifted, Governor Ige has said that any new state employee that would like to work for the state will be required to be vaccinated in order to be hired on as a state employee. We know that you're also a candidate for governor. If you should be elected into that role, do you think that this is a policy that you would support moving forward?
Actually, no. And this is important that you recognize I was never in favor of mandatory vaccinations. I support vaccinations in every way. I instead always chose to recommend them and demonstrate with my medical background the benefit and the science of doing it. We only had a very small incremental benefit from getting a mandate in place. I actually preferred to unite people and bring them together to make that decision. We only went from the low 70 percentiles to about 77% statewide over the course of the last 3 months. At this point, it's more important for us to unite as a people and encourage people to get the vaccination, but we're now out of the emergency proclamation and we should go back to our traditional standard of giving healthcare advice and advocacy. That's sometimes controversial in people's minds, but I think people understand the value of vaccinations now. That's why so many of our people got them.
You also mentioned boosters, and our booster rate is relatively low if you look at how compared to our vaccination rate. Why hasn't, do you think, there been an uptick in people getting the booster, and what more can the state do to encourage boosters, knowing that immunity does wane over time from those first 2 shots?
There's little more that can be done. The good news on the boosters is that most of the people who got them are kupuna, people who needed them most to protect them from severe illness and hospitalization. We have had 550,000 or 552,000 individuals get boosters, but that's out of 1.1 million or so people who had 2 shots, so it's just about half. That leaves a lot of people that could get boosters and probably should. Again, they have to make up their own minds at this point. We've had 2 years to determine whether or not people wanted to get vaccinated. We started our vaccination program on December 15th, more than a year ago, and people know what the consequences of not being vaccinated are. But we can't hold everyone else hostage based on more recommendations or mandates. That just really won't go over with people because, once again, people do have to begin to move toward normal. And the normalcy means seeing your doctor regularly, getting back into your job, being out and about, making sure your kids can develop properly. And if you pile on too much, people end up shutting you down and they don't want to hear it. And so it's important, this is the family doctor approach, it's important to educate people, be very open and communicate, but you don't want to be too heavy-handed. So giving people the the advice and the opportunity to get boosters is going to be great. And it's going to be like the flu shot, basically. The flu shot we recommend every year for everyone to get. Rarely do we get much more than 50 or 55% of our people getting flu shots, so it's pretty extraordinary that 77% of the whole population got the vaccines for COVID. Actually, 82% of everyone who's eligible, because young kids represent a small part of our population and couldn't do it. I got a booster. I'm going to get the second booster because I'm 52 years old and it's been recommended, so I recommend that to anyone who's watching who's over 50. I think it's a smart thing to do. But we should be smart, but not punitive or pressure people.
You mentioned the emergency order that was in place for quite some time during this COVID-19 pandemic, and the governor having to use those emergency powers throughout his time in making some of these decisions. The legislature is looking at the use of a governor's ability to use the emergency order and to make these declarations and somewhat present some limitations on it, or some checks and balances with the legislature also being involved in that process. What are your thoughts about this plan moving forward through the legislature about executive orders and what a governor will be allowed to do should that order be required?
Well, look, obviously it would be the honor of a lifetime to serve as governor, and I will work with the legislature under whatever terms the law states. And so if they feel strongly that we have to rein in emergency powers, I'm going to work with them. The reality of emergency rules, the emergency proclamation, are that the executive branch has to work 24/7 every day. And I know, because I just did that with General Hara, with the director of health, with the governor, with a large team. You can't ever turn it off. And so if you have to come back to the legislature too often to check, it will create challenges. What I would do as governor is make sure we were with the legislature every step of the way. And I would bring the legislature back into session if need be, and also meet with them constantly to make sure that they felt comfortable that the best advice was given to our people. But for the actual purposes of emergency response, you really want your executive branch, HIEMA, and the Adjutant General to do that. Again, I will work with the legislature. I already have spoken to many of them during this campaign so that they know how I would make decisions perhaps differently than Governor Ige. But I think people have seen how I operate, and I've been very collaborative during this process. So I'm not too worried about that if they pass the bill.
One of the primary challenges that the next governor is going to face is the issue of water. Water, of course, is life here in Hawaii, and we now have a severe limitation because of the Red Hill crisis. Ernie Lau was on this program. He said that after the summer, they're going to reevaluate and perhaps have to place restrictions on new development. That has huge consequences when you look at building more housing, both affordable and just for business purposes and growing our economy, construction jobs, the list goes on and on. What do you think we should do? And Ed Case was on here and he said perhaps we need to prioritize certain development over others. That gets a little bit tricky. And certainly a lot of developers in this town would not like to hear that. But, Ernie Lau said the hard truth is that he doesn't want to, worry developers, but there are real water shortages and consequences both from Red Hill and from the drought that we're currently experiencing. How do you think we best handle what will be a continued crisis given what has happened at Red Hill?
Well, I appreciate that. Speaking first of Red Hill, yes, my team and I were the first to go into Red Hill. I was acting governor at the time when that spill was noted. And we went and asked them to shut it down immediately. I sat across from admirals and generals and insisted that they shut down Red Hill and move the fuel above ground. The spill has consequences, as you just described. Water is going to be more precious than ever, and any water that we use will need to be prioritized for affordable housing. Affordable housing is absolutely the top issue that we will all face in the coming decade. It means being able to keep our families here, to keep all the economic growth that we want possible. We have to house teachers and firefighters and nurses, police, everybody in the middle class especially. So yes, there may have to be priorities. We've already asked them to expedite the drilling of additional wells. Also, I immediately reached out to some experts across the globe, including people as far away as Israel, where they do desalination projects. We have one project that's in a pilot phase right now, but I think that may very well be a part of what we have to do for the state of Hawaii. So we're going to have to do more than just the normal, which is hope and pray that people will build houses. We have to build tens of thousands of units in the coming years to bring that price point down for the middle class so that we can actually afford to live here and stay in Hawaii. He said that there's a 10% reduction in water that's necessary. They've also suggested it could be as high as 30%. Having said all that, the Navy will have to support our water needs financially in every way possible and help us build housing if that is the consequence of their spill at Red Hill. I've already mentioned that to the generals. I think that they understand that the consequences of this spill are very far-reaching, much more even than the local contamination of the water around the Red Hill shaft.
If you can speak a little more about the relationship you think moving forward with the military in general and Hawaii, we know that it is a big part of our economic engine, the number 2 industry in Hawaii after tourism. So what do you think that relationship should be like with Hawaii and the military? Do you foresee any issues moving forward with some in the community saying the trust has been broken with this Red Hill issue? And how do you integrate, how do you see the military integrating into Hawaii down the line?
That is a great question. You're asking a question that's quite broad, actually. It speaks to the leadership qualities that you want in your governor, your lieutenant governor, and so on. We have to have leadership that we can trust. And that doesn't just mean me if I'm selected as governor. We also have to trust the leadership in the military. And I will have a close relationship where I speak with them all the time because, number one, you see now what they do and how it impacts our economy, our growth, our housing, the cleanliness of our environment, our water. In addition to that, they are necessary. They do protect us in the region. And Hawaii is very relevant as far as our geopolitical strength in the Pacific. And now, with the war in Ukraine, it's actually more relevant than ever. So I think we have to be mindful that we respect the military, but they, first and foremost, have to know that they are our partners here in Hawaii. So that relationship means that they have to not only be safe and clean here, as far as water goes, and if their footprint's going to remain very, very robust, which it likely will, that they're going to have to take extra effort to help us with housing, to help us with clean water. Their mission extends far beyond the protection of the United States. It also extends to the well-being of our people in Hawaii. There is Pohakuloa, there's Makua Valley, there's Kahuku. There are a lot of leases that are coming up. All of these things are being considered, and also they're all considered in the context of whether or not the military is part of our ohana. And that's what I expressed to the admirals and generals. I said, I respect you. If you are truly part of our ohana, that means you have to help us with our crises as well. You live here, we live here, we're going forward together, so help us build housing. Help us make sure the water is clean, and we will help support you as you carry out your mission in the Pacific and beyond.
You know, I think there is a general consensus that the military should pay for any implications of what has happened at Red Hill. But Ernie Lau did say that they are looking at potentially raising rates in the meantime because they do have to drill these wells, and that sort of it would be a system because they can't, you know, mandate that money. They can't make them pay, that the ratepayers would have to front that money essentially now. And hopefully we get the money back and then we can pay the ratepayers back. A lot of working families here, as you know, live check to check or a little bit, maybe with a tiny bit of cushion, but water's expensive and those rates could go up. So how do we get, I mean, you know, if you can answer this is the $1 million question. How do we get them to pay? Also, given that the Navy is still pursuing its lawsuit. Ernie Lau did clarify that as well when we talked to him, that the Navy's still pursuing their lawsuit. They haven't dropped that. So, you know, how do we get them to pay these costs so that the ratepayers in Honolulu aren't stuck footing the bill, you know, for years to come?
Well, if I may be direct, to be good partners, to be part of Ohana, they will have to carry their share of the cost and damages, without a doubt. And the only way you move forward is with trust and respect. That's what they have to restore, and we all know it. That means paying not just the $1 million question, the hundreds of millions of dollars of questions, because water will be expensive. It will also determine whether or not we're able to have a vibrant recovery with housing and to actually house our people. The highest cost of living issue is housing right now. The cost of housing is by far the biggest impact on all of our families, especially Alice families who can barely afford rent and save any money for food or medicine. So this speaks to affordability. First of all, the military has to carry that part of the bill, and I'm sure that they will. Senator Schatz has already gone after, I believe, $1 billion to empty the tanks. I'm sure there will also be emergency appropriations to help us with sourcing new wells, bringing that water online much more quickly than Ernie has recommended. Even though they will work hard, they're going to have to work 10 times faster and harder to make sure we have adequate clean water. So that's one part of it. Affordability also means not having to have taxes on things like medicine and food. These are a part of a larger play. And forwarding our plans on housing. If we can get housing built now, we can decrease the overall cost because we'll have a better inventory. If we're constrained because water is constrained, that's going to be a hidden cost on our people. And that's why I reached out immediately to the military and said, the real problem you're going to have is how you support our housing. You will be able to clean up the well, you'll be able to clean up the source of water in the immediate vicinity of the spill, but you will not be able to see us find that housing very quickly. It's always been a challenge. It's going to be a huge challenge on Hawaiian homelands. That's where the cost of living usually resides for us, and the very high cost of living. So this is going to be their task. If I'm governor, I'm going to press the military very hard to expand the scope of their commitment to Hawaii, and that means housing, clean water, and so on. So these are big, complicated problems that are all tied into one another. That's why you have to be on top of it, not just in kind of a monolithic way and just look only at Red Hill, which was important to shut down, but also what the collateral impact has been.
Another issue that the next governor will have to deal with is what's happening on the Big Island that continues the debate over the 30-meter telescope and the construction of that project moving forward. There continues to be discussion over the overall management of the Mauna moving forward and partnership with the University of Hawaii. We know those discussions are actually happening right now. If you are, again, elected governor, would you support the construction of the 30-meter telescope on Hawaii Island?
That question is not a yes or no question. That question is a question of trust and respect for the people of Hawaii. Let me say this. I absolutely support science, research, astronomy. I also support the structure of our cultural relationship with the Hawaiian people. The failed management, which has gone on for far too long, and the promises that were broken damaged the relationship so that you ended up having protests that stopped the building of the telescope. We have to recommit ourselves to that trust, which means build the housing that was promised. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands has 80,000 acres around the mountain. There are 28,000 families that were due housing that did not occur. There were leases that weren't paid, and that's why this was a symptom of a much larger problem. I would love to see astronomy go forward for the state of Hawaii, but only through a trusted relationship can that happen. And any politician who says they're going to just roll right over people who have a difference of opinion is really not being honest with you. I do think there should be different management on the top of the mountain. It has to be very comprehensively Hawaiian. My family lives on the Big Island. Many of them are Hawaiian or Filipina or Korean from Hilo. These are people who have strong opinions about how the Hawaiian people have been treated on the mountain. Brokering that peace is central to getting any kind of progress on the TMT. That will be a discussion that I'll lead as governor, and if I'm chosen as governor, Jamie will be the first Hawaiian First Lady, and she has strong feelings about that too. So we as a team, in partnership with the Hawaiian people and the astronomy community, I hope we'll be able to move things forward. But I will not steamroll people. I really think we have to come back to a place of trust and respect before we go forward.
So do you support then the legislation to change the management of TMT and take it out of the hands of the university?
I think there does have to be change. I think the university has not done an adequate job describing what astronomy should be. I think we should decommission telescopes more rapidly. I think that they haven't done that. And I think that there are hundreds and hundreds of acres, and they've recommended this to the credit of the university, that should be put in the hands of people who can conserve the land and who can steward it culturally, particularly the Hawaiian people. But the university has not been capable of moving that forward, and we're at an impasse. So yes, change is necessary.
Another balance that we're trying to find and figure out is that of, with regards to tourism. We continue to see numbers increase in the visitors that are coming to Hawaii, as the COVID-19 pandemic wanes down. We actually have a comment here from Heidi that's asking, what are your plans to control tourism and protect residential communities moving forward should you be elected governor?
Thank you. Yes, so right now there are several things on tourism that we have to do. 10.5 million is a large number, and its impact has been felt in some cases with great difficulty by our citizens. Decreasing the number of tourists, but making the tourists who come more culturally sensitive and actually more economically beneficial for the state is where we have to go. That means tourists that pay for a better experience, probably stay longer, but have a smaller footprint. There are going to have to be considerations of impact fees or green fees on tourists if we're going to continue to see these numbers, and that money needs to be invested in preservation of our environment and put toward our top priorities like housing or Hawaiian homelands. These are some of the proposals that I've already begun to explore with economists here in our state, top people at the University of Hawaii, the Hawaiian community, those who are homesteaders that have supported me. These are the kind of conversations we're having. Now, regarding the total number, there's no magic number. It's not 7 million or 8 million or 10 million. We just don't know what that is. But we can do a lot more with tourism than we've done. We've really stagnated. And as you saw, it was quite peaceful when we were more at 7 or 8 million with the Safe Travels program. They also were able to tolerate the $140 fee, which was the test that came into the state of Hawaii, the Safe Travels test. So there is some potential there to invest in resources that come from tourists into Hawaii. That's traditionally been the TAT tax, and we do also have to restore some of those resources to manage tourism going forward. I think we would be way better if we reset tourism at a lower number and had some fees that came from high-end tourists that went towards essentially conservation in our state. We're also going to have to be paying for the impacts of global warming, sea level rise, and all of the large footprint that tourism presents to us. And then finally, also climate refugees. All these things are going to have significant costs that we have to invest in, and tourism should be the nexus to help pay for that.
I want to ask you, of course, about the campaign itself. We know that you're running for governor, but you also have a day job at the state capitol as the lieutenant governor and a part-time job, of course, working in the emergency room over in North Kohala. So tell us about how you're balancing all of that. And also, you did mention your wife. Can we expect to see her doing campaign events as well? What is the sort of strategy going forward as we lead up to the primary?
Yes, well, thank you for asking. I'm honored to be supported by so many people. We've really seen great support across the state in the last year. So yes, I am running for governor, and Jamie's at my side every step of the way. So again, thank you to her and the teachers and the firefighters and HGA and all these guys who have been supportive. I'm honored to have support of a broad base of people, mostly working people. Now, how do I balance these things? I get up at 3 in the morning and I make sure that we know what's going on for the state and how we're going to be impacted in every which way. It's important, though, that we transition leadership sometime first through the primaries in August and then, of course, November in the general election. And my familiarity with this crisis, I think, has been helpful. It set me apart, obviously, from all of the other individuals that are considering becoming governor. But there's more to it than that. We've been through so much that we have to assess who actually we trust and who can lead us. And so that's what I'm trying to express. I mean, I've done all that I can to be transparent and lead in a caring way. I think that's what this election's about. As to being a doctor, it's informed me very well on our needs in crisis. I'm now down to 1 weekend a month just because there's simply too much to do and too many people to speak to, speaking to thousands and thousands of people every week to make sure that they know me and they know my family and they know my team. People have seen how we lead through COVID, but I also want people to understand my focus on affordable housing, on homelessness, which, as you know, was one of my priorities before COVID broke out, and on affordable living in Hawaii. It's like juggling. You have to make sure that each ball is up in the air and it doesn't hit the ground. And I appreciate that there are so many needs in our state. Elections are interesting because they give me an opportunity to speak with people. Yesterday, for example, I spoke with the economic leaders at the university in the afternoon, but in the morning I spoke with a group of students who are at West Oahu's campus with Dr. Rick Custodio. These are the people who tomorrow will need to buy homes and will be our healthcare providers, and they were able to share their perspective with me. So I'm I'm very grateful to be in the position I am, to be lieutenant governor and be able to hear people so often on these challenges.
Another race that is open is to fill your seat as lieutenant governor. We know a number of candidates have already put their name in for that seat and to fill your role. There have been some discussions and possible, talks and murmurings in the legislature about changing the statute and allowing the governor to pick his or her running mate, for lieutenant governor rather than that be an elected seat. Would you support that? And do you think overall that is something that would be more beneficial if you had the opportunity, should you become the Democratic nominee, to choose your own lieutenant governor rather than it be an elected position?
This might surprise you guys and our viewers, but the answer is no. I don't, for a couple reasons. One, I think it's pretty clear I would not have been chosen lieutenant governor the last time around. I had to earn it myself. Going door to door, I went to 60,000 houses over the course of the lieutenant governor race and got to meet so many people. That was a great honor to earn people's trust and become lieutenant governor. And so I think it's good when your lieutenant governor earns their job. And I also think it gives some diversity and some different perspective. It gives people a chance to elect two very different people. I think it's pretty safe to say I'm different than each of the other 5 candidates, all of whom I have respect for, and I could easily say something very positive about if we had more time today. So I'm rooting for them to have a spirited, honest, very ethical conversation about what they would do as lieutenant governor. I shaped the lieutenant governorship, I think, in a way that is very different than past lieutenant governors. I took as active a role as was humanly possible, and I hope people appreciated that. I have heard from each of the lieutenant governors that they appreciate what happened these last 4 years because that will give them more autonomy and that will give them more purpose if they become lieutenant governor. If I become governor, I can tell you this. Even though that person will not be hand-selected by me, if I'm chosen, I will work with them hand in hand. After feeling at times that I didn't have 24/7 communication with the governor or didn't have a relationship that was kind of like a kumbaya moment, I appreciate the need to add extra support to lieutenant governor and to mentor them. And that's what I'll do. I will create a campus on the 5th floor where people collaborate so that the lieutenant governor's team is fully integrated. I do want to be respectful to the governor, though. He included me in every single cabinet meeting, and I was able to give input and work very vibrantly on COVID. And that did mean a lot to me, and I hope to the people of Hawaii. But that's how I would handle the lieutenant governorship. And I just like, I like mixing it up in elections, I have to tell you. And so if you have 2 people selected, they'll bring different skill sets.
Okay, we are at the top of the hour, so very briefly, just give you a final thought. Your message to the people watching today, both as lieutenant governor and as someone who hopes to take the governor's office in the fall.
Well, thank you. As lieutenant governor, let me say this. We've come through so much together. I'm just honored to see that you made sacrifices that ultimately paid off, and we've come through as a much stronger Ohana. So now that COVID has begun to recede, we're doing very well. Go back to your lives. Engage in the things that mattered most to you. Family time, first birthdays, your jobs. These are the things that we have to live for. Now, as your candidate for governor, we have, again, been through so much together. We need to have trusted, caring leadership. And I hope that that's what I bring to you. We'll have lots of opportunities to talk, I'm sure, here on Spotlight, but also in person across the state. I've accepted so many invitations already to be with people, and we'll see more of that. So I will be there for you. I really love the people of Hawaii, and it has been the honor of a lifetime to be lieutenant governor. But if I'm chosen to be governor, you can expect action, not just on crises like COVID, but also on the crisis of affordable housing, affordability in Hawaii, and homelessness. But again, thank you everyone for sticking with us. It really means a lot to me.
All right, Lieutenant Governor Josh Green joining us this morning. Thank you so much for being here and for taking time out of the week to have the discussion on some of these topics. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Aloha.
Aloha. Well, interesting to hear from him, both, of course, as a candidate and as the lieutenant governor. And I was interested in his response to your last question, Ryan, about whether or not he thinks the lieutenant governor should be handpicked. He did acknowledge that there has been some tension between him and Governor Ige over the last 2 years. Just they have different leadership styles and they had different responses to the pandemic. But he did say that he was included in every cabinet meeting. There wasn't always, harmony between the two, but he actually said that tension can be productive, and he likes the idea of having 2 different trains of thoughts occupying the Capitol.
Yeah, you said he had to earn his position there, and that he probably would not have been selected had that opportunity not presented itself to be elected into that seat. And so he says that it should stay the way that it is. We have discussed on this program, in fact, about the talks that there may be some changes that maybe some in the legislature want to take up and look at changing state statutes that would change that overall procedure and that process. But Lieutenant Governor right now says that he supports the way it is. We also got his stance on where we, of course, are with COVID-19, saying that we are in a position now where we are kind of heading out of this, where we can return back to normalcy, getting back to events, meeting with people face to face. You did hear him mention the current variant and what's going on now, that the state continues to monitor that, but it's not something that should be alarming or something that is of caution as of this moment.
Right, and some departures there with Ige again when it comes to hiring state employees. He said that he would not mandate vaccinations for new hires for state employees. He also said that he's spoken with the superintendent and that while it is the purview of the Department of Health and the Department of Education, in his view, students should be allowed to get rid of the masks at least by the summer and the fall, saying that there are consequences, citing some recent news about adolescence and depression and consequences perhaps from increased isolation because of the isolation of COVID over the last 2 years for young people and all of us. So that was interesting to hear that his thoughts on perhaps lifting mask mandates indoors in schools. When we could see that, we don't know. The DOE is keeping that policy in place for now, but he says it's something that he would advocate perhaps getting rid of starting in the summer.
And we also heard his thoughts. I mean, we talked about it, covered a lot of topics. So if you missed any part of the conversation, we encourage you to go back because we did discuss a variety of issues that are happening in Hawaii. But one particular soundbite that came out of this, I think, conversation was the Lieutenant Governor saying that the military has to play a more active role moving forward, and not only with what's happening at Red Hill, but also with housing. Saying that he would be looking for the military to be more integrated into supporting some of the issues that currently plague the state of Hawaii and how they are all interwoven, including housing for not only Native Hawaiians, but just affordable housing overall. So interesting to hear his thoughts on that. We will continue on that conversation of housing with Native Hawaiians on Monday.
That's right. Tyler Gomes from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is going to be joining us to talk about the bill moving through the legislature to spend $600 million for that department to build housing, and also commitments going forward to really, boost that department and get that waiting list cut. We know that there are families who wait for, we've heard, generations before they're able to get land to build homes on. So how would this bill change things? How would that infusion of cash help? And what do they want to do moving forward? We'll talk about that on Monday. So join us right back here at 10:30.
Aloha. Have a great weekend.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.